50 years.
Yeah, you know, when we were growing up, the phone used to ring so much, and you would pick it up sometimes, and you would say, "Grand Central Station."
Depending on which son was getting the phone calls,
I don't know.
right?
Well, you didn't know who the phone calls were coming for. They were coming for everybody,
Right.
between you and Daddy and everybody else. You know.
It's an interesting life.
Yeah. It was so interesting reading the interview with you when you were, like 38 years old. You had been the Woman of the Year for the Chamber of Commerce, and I think you were on the board for the Chamber of Commerce, the first woman on the board.
Right.
And I think that was when you were retiring from the Hadassah position.
I had another 2 years or so on Hadassah, right?
Okay,
Nationally.
yeah. But was that the regional president that you were retiring from? Because you were saying in the interview, well, it's a new chapter. I have to do something, and we talked about maybe you would run for office, like the state representative
Right.
or something. And we had some conversations. It was interesting. There was one of the conversations that I was laughing about when I was reading it, and we were talking about yesterday that the, the Chamber of Commerce didn't want to have a woman on the board because they thought that their meetings were too risque, and having a woman they would be embarrassed, but that once they had a woman they found out that they got a lot more accomplished.
True.
Yeah,
True.
that's pretty funny.
It's but that's a natural thing that men have different conversations. Um, now they may just talk about sports rather than other stuff.
No comment. Depends. Yeah, and it is interesting that talking about sports, that's something that you've always been so actively interested in, and that the boys, all of us as a family, and then your grandkids also talk to you about sports.
It's wonderful.
And the number of times that I call you and it's like, well, I'm watching the game, I'm watching the Red Sox, or I'm watching the Patriots, or Providence, of course, Providence Friars. You know that you're always going to be watching that.
Right.
And
It's a part of life.
yeah,
And it's interesting because I can talk to you and your brother and your nephews and your son, and
yeah,
I love it when they put that all on Zoom.
no, we're actually
Or,
texting on that group.
oh, is that? And it's great.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I know it's just and you're very funny sometimes with your comments in the middle of a game. Like what was that, or I can't even remember the specifics, but you do have some very funny comments. Um, and it's funny. It's it's so funny when I wake up and I'm here, and the first thing you're doing in the morning is you're looking on your Facebook on your phone, just like a teenager.
Well, because it's crazy because um, not in this world that we live. If you don't have a Facebook and you don't have a cell, and I have friends who don't have cell phones at all,
I can't imagine.
they have no, and there's a meeting.
Yeah,
And sometimes, for instance, with Fern stuff, if I don't look at it first thing in the morning on a Wednesday,
yeah,
I don't get to see her program
right.
because
Yeah,
I
she
don't.
sends her things out then, right?
It's always on a Wednesday morning, and the show is at 1:30. And if I don't do it early in the morning, then I miss the whole thing.
Right.
Now, for instance, today is Wednesday, and I have not seen her notice,
I saw it.
but I didn't see it
Yeah, that's when we
because
talked.
I'm
Yeah.
looking at all old stuff,
Right, right, right.
and
Yeah,
it's really tough,
yeah,
um, and it gets confusing in life if you get all these things that you don't need, and I get so tired of. That's why I just sat there and removed it all,
uh-huh.
or tried.
Well, speaking about removing it all, it was one of the funny things that I wrote. Um, I said in my write up when I was interviewing you uh, I could quote, I don't have it in front of me, but you said, well, she's considering either running for public office or running away from home, which is something that I do know. I do remember at times you would say, I'm just going to go to Chicago. I don't know why you picked
Not
Chicago.
Chicago.
Didn't you? Did you used to say Chicago?
I can't imagine. I never. I've only been there once in my life.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but I know that there were times when we had all three of us maniacs running around, and Daddy wasn't home, and I think you were ready to pull your hair out.
Right, many times.
Yeah, but it is amazing when I realized that you had been Woman of the Year and you were only 37 years old. It's like, it's funny. So in my interview with you, you said, well, the problem with doing so much volunteering at that age, it's like, okay, then what's next? You know?
Right.
So I think at that point you started to go to work in the State House, right? Was that around then?
I started there in 1977.
Really?
So it was a few years after that.
It was 77?
Yep.
Oh, you worked for,
I worked for Joe.
You worked for the accounting,
right.
Joe and the accounting firm
right.
first. Okay, that's right.
But I still had another year or two on some of my Hadassah stuff.
Right, yeah.
So it wasn't completely finished.
Okay, that makes sense. So, so in the interview, my interview, you kind of left us hanging. Okay, so what's next? Am I gonna run for state rep? You didn't want to run for city council because Dad was on the school board, and you didn't want to be meddling in that. And then I don't know if you ever were serious about running for like a state rep or something.
What happened is that the state rep we had was not very good, and so
yeah, there was a lot. You said there was a lot of criticism.
I was being urged to do something, but in my 20 years working for the state of Rhode Island, I accomplished more for people and for the state and for the Speaker of the House than I would have if I had been a rep.
Well, that's pretty interesting.
I was in the office, the Speaker's office for 3 years, and I continued working in other departments in the legislature. So I knew a lot of people. I was able to travel places with the legislature.
Yeah.
And it was really, I accomplished a lot, I thought.
That's really amazing. It's really, really cool. That's funny. I'm thinking about the picture of you with your hard hat on the Newport Bridge when that was going up. That was in the 60s. When I think the bridge opened in, what was it, 68 or 69
we
or something?
Had an anniversary.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I just saw those pictures today. Sometimes on Facebook there are people, old pictures of the bridge being done. And I'd like, if I only knew how to do it, I could send a couple of the pictures of me standing there.
I could show you how to put pictures on your own page.
Yeah, because
that's pretty easy.
Because it was an exciting time of the year because I was on the chamber board at the time.
Yeah.
And so got to know
I think that'd be a fun thing I could help you with, is to teach you how to put some of your pictures onto your Facebook page, because people that know you would enjoy seeing some of those,
Well, I'm glad what you showed me this morning about how to
look at your own page.
Looking at some of the comments that people had written, because I didn't know how to reach them.
Yeah.
It was really
well, you do a lot on your phone, which is a little bit less easy than it is on your computer, because if you're on your computer you can look at it differently.
I'm not very good about getting Facebook on the computer. So
right. Well, you're on your phone more of the time anyway.
Oh yeah.
But that's pretty amazing. You think back, was it Dick Tracy and like the thing on his phone, or Maxwell Smart, and it was like so futuristic, and that's actually what we're doing now,
Right.
We have all this information like that, and as you said, some of your friends don't do any of that, and you realize how important it is, and it's really helped, I think, to continue to feel connected, you know?
right. And to keep my kids and my grandkids knowing what's going on in this world.
Yeah. Uh, you know, it's also it's just good for us to be in touch, and you know, you never know. I appreciate that I've had the time to spend staying with you, and because you never know how much time you have. You know, you could be here another 15 years.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I don't think so. My sister is 97, and this
yeah,
coming week she'll be 97. So,
yeah. So you never know.
no, should be the oldest in our in our family.
Yeah,
My mother and dad didn't live that long.
but they were in their 90s.
Mother died in 93.
Uh,
Daddy died earlier than that.
yeah, but still 80 something.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's pretty good for that generation. You know.
right. And they both died around Jewish holidays.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Mhm.
Grammy on Passover and Daddy
Right after Yom
right
Kippur.
after the Yom Kippur when he came home.
That's pretty amazing.
Yep.
And he had he had all of his sins forgiven or whatever, which whatever you do on Yom Kippur, you know,
I should
you
be
can
so
best,
lucky.
you know. Um, so you started back to work. How did it come about that you got the job with Joe? You know, in
As in the accountant office,
yeah,
because his wife told her he said he told her that he was looking for somebody, and she said, "Well, Rita's not doing anything. She'd like to get a job."
yeah,
So he hired me,
yeah,
and I was there for several years.
yeah.
And then one day, it was an election year. It must have been
76.
76, right? And I came home from work, and your father was there with a gentleman who was a politician. He was a state rep, and he wanted to become Speaker of the House.
Yeah,
And so I came in, and they were sitting there, and there was one vote that he needed, and it was a person from Newport. And so he had come to Newport to try to convince Daddy to try to convince
uh huh.
this man to be the final vote. And they sat for a while, and they were talking, and had I made sandwiches, and they had drinks, and I guess I sat in on some of the conversation. I'm not sure. And as he was ready to leave, Ed said to me, "Gee, Rita, you do a good job. Would you like to come to work for me in the office of the Speaker of the House if I win?" And I said, "Oh, oh, that's interesting. Well, you'd have to travel to Providence. You would get a nice salary. You would get a pension when you leave. You get health benefits, which would be great because Daddy and I really didn't have a good program then." Um, and I said, "Well, that would be interesting."
Yeah,
And so he won. It was 2 days later, and he won. And I remember I was in, at a class in Providence, driving home, and I heard on the radio that he had been uh, elected Speaker of the House. And then he called me after that, and he said, "Would you like to come up and work with me?" And I was there in his particular office for 3.5 years. But in total, I worked for the state for 20 years.
mhm,
And then your father and I were walking on the beach one day, and this man was there, and he said, "Hey, Rita, I got something for you. You'd be the right person." And I said, "What would I do?" And he said, well, we need a new person that is running the canvassing office in Newport. And
Now, at that point, were you still working at the state?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And
But what were you working in the office of budget or something? I'm trying to remember what you were.
at one time I was
You were
doing that,
legislative.
and then I did legislative staff
Yeah.
and helping the whole legislature doing things that they needed to have done, and we had a staff,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
good staff, so we did that. But
Yeah.
you know, um, so
So anyway, so you're you're walking on the beach.
yeah. And he asked me, he said, "Wouldn't you like to do that?" And I said, "Wow, yeah, I guess, except I had to be elected by the members of the city council."
Okay.
And so there were, I think there's 7 members of the
So
city.
who was it that asked you?
There's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
He was involved in the Democratic Party in Newport
Yeah.
because you had to have Democrat, so many Democrats and Republicans uh, on the canvassing authority.
Yeah.
And so, but you had to be elected by the city council. So there were 7 members, and I got 6 votes.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Well, the other person was a Republican,
Yeah. Right.
and he didn't want me.
Uh-huh.
Turned out we became good friends after that. So I got to be clerk of the canvassing authority, and I was there for almost 10 years. So I had almost 30 years working after my whole volunteer time.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, right?
But in the meantime,
Yeah.
I had other things going on, even while I was doing this work. I still went to Israel and through Hadassah, and was president of another Hadassah group.
Yep.
And
And then, when did you start being on any of the boards for Toro Synagogue or for the Synagogue Foundation?
well, as you probably just saw yesterday, there was a picture of me in 1976
Yes.
when that's another time when Good Boy showed, right?
Yeah.
There were only men allowed to be on the boards or be involved with running the synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
And so in 1976 or 77, I can't remember, well, I guess it was 76, they voted to allow women to be members of the congregation, in fact.
Wow.
And so at that same time, they allowed them to be on the board. And I was the first woman voted to be on the board of Toro Synagogue, Congregation Jesuit Israel now.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was voted to be treasurer.
Ah.
And so from then on, I have been on the board of Congregation Jesuit Israel.
Really, continuously since then.
Yeah, in various positions, and became president, the first woman president in 1999, I think it was, and I'm still involved in it.
Yeah.
And what they keep trying to keep me on the board, but they shouldn't. I mean, they should get rid of me, but they put me in different positions so that I can be involved on the management committee. So that's been interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And
so what was the process like for the congregation and the officers and the powers that be to decide that they would allow a woman to be president? Now, was it actually co-president because they still had to have a man as a co-president?
Right, you still needed a man who would be doing the religious section.
Right.
Because a woman is not allowed to be downstairs on the bima and to be involved.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So we always have had the man doing the religious part. sometimes they're not there anyway, and I'm upstairs, but
Yeah.
but to to make those decisions and stuff.
I'll have to your left, although there's some glare, I'm not going to move the camera. There's a couple pictures of the show, one of the Bima and one of you and Daddy upstairs. Uh, so I'll have to move the camera. I'll take some things. Actually, you've got 3 out of your 5 things on the wall are of Touro Synagogue, and I know that that's something that has always been a very core part of you.
Right, right. You know, I said earlier today, I think that my friend Bernice and I are the oldest. I know we're the oldest people on the board, and maybe the oldest active people in the congregation right now. Um,
It's interesting. We went to 2 funerals on Monday
right,
of longtime, synagogue participants and members. Um, and I think that somebody said that Chicky Friedman had said that she enjoyed sitting upstairs because she could see everybody.
me too.
Yeah, which is it's interesting, you know, 90 some percent, I would assume, of today's congregations, women and men sit together and pray together and you know are educated. I mean, I don't really know. At your time, I assumed that you probably didn't have a bat mitzvah, but from over the years, it's become such an important thing to have both boys and girls get bat mitzvah and be conversant in all the prayers and all of that, to be involved in congregations and stuff like that.
Well, we did have a confirmation when we were 16
Mm-hmm.
downstairs in the
Mm-hmm.
synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
And then when maybe 20 years ago, a rabbi that we had a class for women,
Mm-hmm.
and there were a lot more people involved, at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And he had us do like a bar mitzvah. He had us run a service,
Mm-hmm.
and it was wonderful because we all did the prayers, and we all knew the prayers, and were able to do it.
Yeah.
And then I guess I'm trying to think how many years after that it took, and I was the first woman, I believe, to read from the Torah,
Mm-hmm.
um, which was
Yeah.
quite an honor.
Yeah. I think, and I know when Fern was growing up, she was very active and did all that stuff, and she, that was my generation. But I don't remember if the girls that I grew up with had bat mitzvahs. I don't
No.
think they did.
No, that was Rabbi Lewis.
Yeah. Now,
he wouldn't have done it.
yeah, it's just interesting, all of the evolution in that category. But I think it was interesting reading my interview with you and quote unquote talking about women's lib as a movement at the time and what that meant. And I'm really heartened, because I'm a great believer that there's a song that I sing in my band that I think is like a Jamaican song. It's called "The Women Are Smarter." but it's just interesting that as there's more opportunities, because we actually talked about in our interview the problem that could happen with women who just stayed home and were isolated and didn't really have the opportunity to participate, and maybe had some really good thoughts but just didn't get out there, and it's been over the course of your lifetime, a lot of evolution. It's unfortunate that we haven't had our first woman president of the United States,
Right.
but we certainly see a lot of women in the leadership. There's probably not a lot of enough women in the leadership in the Senate probably right now. It's still a little bit of a old white men's club, but that's just, an observation that comes up.
We have a couple of good ones like Amy.
Yeah, yeah. But but it is interesting to see how all that's evolved over time, and continues to evolve. And um, it's it's fascinating thinking back to that you said in way back then, you wanted to accomplish something, you wanted to do something meaningful. You didn't want to just sit at a desk and do something mindless. That was very important to you, even though you had training as a secretary, going to secretarial school, you wanted to be a participant.
When the first day that I went to work at the speaker's office, and there was no desk, there was no table, there was no chair, there was nothing for me, and because a lot of the former workers were still there and had not been fired yet.
Yeah.
They were going to be doing that, and they had no room for me. And finally, one day, maybe the second or third day, I said to the man in charge, "Can I have a chance to talk to you?" And so we talked, and I said, I am a Catherine Gibbs girl. And as my first boss said to me many, many, many years ago, when I told him I wasn't very good at shorthand, he said, "The worst Catherine Gibbs graduate is better than anybody else I could possibly be." And so my then new boss was more impressed with me. He thought I was just there because I was a girl that, and I was younger then, right?
Yeah.
And that.
You were there for your looks?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And whatever. Because I made a good sandwich and a good drink.
Yeah.
But I then became the person who sat in the front desk, like the person that people saw.
Yeah.
And I can remember a newspaper person coming in and looking at me, and he said, "What are you doing here? You're from Newport," or some comment like that. I said, "Well, the speaker thought I was going to be very good." So, but all during that time, I was still doing, the synagogue stuff and volunteering in many other places.
And helping me to type my papers for high school. Well, that was when I was out of high school, I guess,
Right.
by then, actually.
Right.
But, well, listen, I've got a lot more subjects, but I got to take a break
Yes.
for lunch. I want to see how this came out, and then we could do some more. This is fun.
Yes.
And I think we can get some good stuff. I really do.
Good.
I do. I'm really, really. I just hope. I want to hear how the voices come out.
Okay.
All right.
It sounds good to me.
All right. Love you, Mom.
Let me